special welcome to people who have arrived after the start of the service. Lovely to have you here. Today we are preparing ourselves for Easter and Easter week, which begins next Sunday as Palm Sunday, and that's the start of Easter week. And we're considering one of the last things that the book of John records that Jesus did in this time. And it's a very famous story about Lazarus. And I have to be careful because sometimes I say Lazarus. It's Lazarus, so listen for that. Lazarus comes back from the dead. Now, this is quite a famous story, so much so that if you looked up what is the meaning of the name Lazarus, they would say someone who comes back to life. Now, also, famous story that many great artists through time have captured in artworks. And I'm going to say, I'm pushing it out here, these are very famous, well-respected, incredible artists. It's not their finest work. When it comes to Lazarus, I don't know what happened, but I'm going to show you some of them. Feel free to turn to your neighbour and say, who painted this picture? Here you go, turn to you. Who is this that painted Lazarus? Do we have a taker? Is there one? Yes. It is Van Gogh. It's a Van Gogh painting. And I'm going to say, it's not really a sunflowers, is it? It's not one that you see when you go to the famous exhibitions. This is not the one they pull out. Here we go. I mean, Lazarus does look dead. I'll give him that. Here's Rembrandt. Unusual. Well, Lazarus is unusual. Here is a famous artist. I haven't remembered all their names. I've put this one up because when you look closely, you can see this. Grim. He seems to have lost a bit of weight. But here's my, I'm saving the best till last. I don't know who painted this. But check out the glad wrap that Lazarus is wrapped around. And also, he hasn't lost weight in this one. Lazarus is a bodybuilder. He's so buff. Anyway, we're going to hear this story, and it's a long one. So I'm going to encourage you, settle in. If your kids start yelling, it's okay. We can handle that. But it's a long story of this. So people said this morning that they liked it, like listening to this big chunk. So here we go. Here is the story from the book of John about Lazarus. A man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany with his sisters Mary and Martha. This is the Mary who later poured the expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was sick, so the two sisters sent a message to Jesus telling him, "Lord, your dear friend is very sick." But when Jesus heard about it, he said, "Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it happened for the glory of God, so that the Son of God will receive glory from this." So although Jesus loved Martha, Mary and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days. Finally, he said to his disciples, "Let's go back to Judea." But his disciples objected. "Rabbi," they said, "only a few days ago the people in Judea were trying to stone you. Are you going there again?" Jesus replied, "There are 12 hours of daylight every day. During the day, people can walk safely. They can see because they have the light of this world. But at night, there is danger of stumbling because they have no light." And then he said, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but now I will go and wake him up." And the disciples said, "Lord, if he is sleeping, he'll soon get better." They thought Jesus meant Lazarus was simply sleeping, but Jesus meant Lazarus had died. So he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there, for now you'll really believe. Come, let us go see him." Thomas, nicknamed the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let's go too and die with Jesus." When Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had been in his grave for 4 days. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask." And Jesus told her, "Your brother will rise again." "Yes," Martha said, "he will rise when everyone else rises at the last day." Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live, even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die." "Do you believe this, Martha?" "Yes, Lord," she said. I have always believed you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God." And then she returned to Mary. She called Mary aside from the mourners and told her, "The teacher is here and wants to see you." So Mary immediately went to him. Jesus had stayed outside the village at the place where Martha met him. When the people who were at the house consoling Mary saw her leave so hastily, they assumed she was going to Lazarus' grave to weep, so they followed her there. When Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. "Where have you put him?" he asked them. And they told him, "Lord, come and see." And then Jesus wept. The people who were standing nearby him said, "See how much he loved him." But some said, "This man healed a blind man. Couldn't he have kept Lazarus from dying?" Jesus was still angry. As he arrived at the tomb, a cave with a stone rolled across its entrance. "Roll the stone aside," Jesus told them. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested, "Lord, he has been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible." And Jesus responded, "Didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believed?" So they rolled the stone aside, and then Jesus looked up to heaven and said, "Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me, but I said it out loud for the sake of all these people standing here, so that they will believe you sent me." Then Jesus shouted, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. And Jesus told them, "Unwrap him and let him go." And many of the people who were with Mary believed in Jesus when they saw this happen. So here's this intense story, and I want to look at 3 things from it. The first is Jesus as fully human, Jesus as the prophet, and Jesus as fully divine. So I want to take some time to have a look at what that is. The first thing we see here is a picture of Jesus, a fully human being. Now, in Greek thought, and we talked about this a little bit over the last few weeks, a perfect man was, the chiseled body, the sharpened mind, but also someone who suppressed their emotions. Because in Greek thought, emotions belonged to the female. Males were just all thinking, and so you had to suppress your emotions. So this is Greek and Roman thought in Jesus' time. And yet here we have Jesus, and we're told that he is the perfect human being. The perfect human being, and he arrives and he encounters his friends, and he sees the loss and the grief. And we are told that 2 things happen to him. A deep anger wells up within him, and then he weeps, and he lets it all out. Now, in my role here, one of the things I do is take funerals. And this terrible thing has happened, inherited from British culture in many New Zealand funerals. I'd say not in tangi, but in funerals, where people come and gather, and the body of their loved one is there, and it is an exercise of a room full of people desperately trying not to cry. And it is one of the most painful things to be part of. Everyone wants to cry, and we've all, learned how to suppress. Now, this is just a wee handy hint. If you are ever in a room and you can't cry for whatever reason, because I can't often in my role, here's what you do. You look around and you name bright light, blue ceiling, white walls, fluffy carpet, black top, black stand. Anyway, so that's just a wee aside. But what I'm going to tell you to do is actually cry. Just cry. And here is, I think, an issue, and here's this beautiful picture of what it means to be fully human, and is actually to feel your emotions, and not just to feel them, to express them. That they could see Jesus was angry and he's weeping. It's probably those dirty tears, where snot's coming out. It's just a hot mess. I don't know if you've ever, when you see a Hollywood movie and you see people crying, they often look quite glamorous. Like, oh, that's really moving. Have you ever looked in the mirror when you're crying? It's awful. Red face, puffy, squinty, bloodshot eyes. Anyway, so Jesus is probably messy crying at this point. He's angry, he's sad, it's this big mess. And here is this invitation. This is perfect humanity. To cry, to express our emotions, and to do it in front of other people when they see. This is Jesus. Now, if we're called to follow Jesus, here's this invitation. Follow Jesus into the mess of our real life, into the mess of our emotions, into the mess of showing what we're really feeling, into the mess of letting other people see and catch a glimpse. When we're at these funerals, there'll always be a family member who is just lost, particularly if it's a younger person who's died. And they're crying. It's very hard to see someone when they are crying and not do anything. So when I take a funeral, I do my thing. So I don't cry, name all the bits. But generally, as the coffin goes out, I'll cry. Because there are people in a room who are absolutely devastated and heartbroken. And at that point, everyone turns around and walks out, and I cry because this is sad. Someone has just lost someone. But I have noticed that sometimes people come and comfort me. Are you okay, Carolyn? Like, of course I'm okay. All I'm doing is crying because somebody has died and somebody's life is devastated and broken. And here is the invitation. To be fully human is to live into and to express life in the fullest. Often in Christian churches you hear people talk about Jesus came to bring life and life in the fullest, and we think that means happiness. Jesus came to bring happiness. Jesus came to give us permission to experience life. And life has its cruel twists and its hard bits, and it's okay to follow Jesus and express them and to let people see. So here is Jesus, fully human. This is one of his best friends, and he's died. Now, the curious thing is he knows, because he's already even told people, God's going to be glorified, all this. He knows the outcome. But he's this huge empathy for the people around him, acknowledging his own feelings in all the midst of this. And they're messy. I don't know why he was angry so much, but that's feelings, isn't it, often? Why am I angry that there's roadblocks? Why is it that we feel these emotions? But Jesus does, I think, the perfect thing. And he weeps and he cries. And then he moves and he does something quite remarkable. And here we find Jesus the prophet. Now, there've already been amongst Jesus' followers this debate. Who is Jesus? We can see he's healing people. He's saying these incredible teachings. So who is he? And they're like, well, he's a prophet in this tradition of people who speak truth. And in our parlance, we'd say truth to power. Jesus speaks truth to power. Jesus drops truth bombs to the people in, positions of authority. Here's Jesus, the prophet. And so in this moment, he does this prophetic act. And often with prophets, they speak against power structures and they speak against injustice. And here Jesus enacts something, and there'd be clues for the people watching, and they know he's doing this prophetic act which is quite powerful for them. So he's going and he's calling a dead man out of a grave. And this is a reference, an embodiment, acting out of one of the Jewish people's favourite passages. And it is, again, a very well-known story, thanks to popular culture. Here is Colin McCann's take on it. It says up there, "Come from the winds, O breath, and breathe upon those slain that they may live." And it says there, "The Valley of Dry Bones" by Colin McCann. And this is a reference to Ezekiel, which is one of the Old Testament prophets. So here's this famous story of Ezekiel and the dry bones, and I'm going to read it to you. Here's the story from centuries before Jesus for the people of Israel. And they are in captivity in another land. So this is Ezekiel writing. "The Lord took hold of me, and I was carried away by the Spirit of the Lord to a valley filled with bones. And he led me all around among the bones that covered the valley floor. They were scattered everywhere across the ground and were completely dried out. Then he asked me, 'Son of man, can these bones become living people again?' 'O sovereign Lord,' I replied, 'you alone know the answer to that.' Then he said to me, 'Speak a prophetic message to these bones and say, "Dry bones, listen to the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Look, I'm going to put breath into you and make you live again. I will put flesh and muscles on you and cover you with skin. I will put breath into you and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord.' So I spoke this message just as God had told me. And suddenly, as I spoke, there was a rattling noise all across the valley. The bones of each body came together and attached themselves as complete skeletons. Then as I watched, muscles and flesh formed over the bones. Then skin formed to cover their bodies, but they still had no breath in them. And then he said to me, 'Speak a prophetic message to the winds, Son of man. Speak a prophetic message and say, "This is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, O breath from the four winds. Breathe into these dead bodies so that they may live again." So I spoke the message as he commanded me, and breath came into their bodies. They all came to life and stood up on their feet, a great army. Then he said to me, "Son of man, these bones represent the people of Israel. They are saying, 'We have become old, dry bones. All our hope is gone. Our nation is finished.' Therefore prophesy to them and say, 'This is what the sovereign Lord says. O my people, I will open your graves of exile and cause you to rise again. Then I will bring you back to the land of Israel. When this happens, O my people, you will know that I am the Lord. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live again and return home to your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done what I said. Yes, the Lord has spoken." Here is a people, the Jews, and they're in their own land, but they are oppressed by foreign rulers. The Romans have come, they have to pay huge taxes to the Romans make rules, and they have lost hope. They have become like dry bones, and this is the theme that runs. The Jews end up oppressed, they've lost hope, they're like dry bones, and here's this picture they cling to. God can redeem us. God can bring us back to life. God can give us what we long for. And they wanted a Messiah, a promised person from God, to turn up and overthrow the Roman army. They wanted Jesus to gather a group of people together and charge, get rid of the Romans and fight off the invading army and become a great nation again. This is what they long for. And Jesus is signalling, "Here I am. I can bring dead bones to life again." So here they are. They're probably reading something in there. Now, I was reading this week about this passage being used through history to bring hope in hopeless situations. And in America in the 1920s, with huge suffering because of oppressive laws against black Americans, a man called James Weldon Johnson listened to his dad preach the sermon on, there's nothing there, on Ezekiel. Now, he was a poet, among many other things, and a lawyer, and a teacher, and a diplomat. He was a very clever man. He was a poet, and he heard this, and he's like, this is a message for my people. And I'm going to write a song to encourage them that God sees us in our oppressed state, and God wants to come and redeem us. And you know this song. Ezekiel cried them dry bones. Ezekiel cried them dry bones. Now, this was kind of hidden because African Americans would go and sing this to white people, perform it, and this was a song that one day God is going to come and redeem us and set us free, and justice will come. I'm going to play to you one of the tracks of a group that used to tour with this. They have added a lot more body parts to the original song.
Dry bones, Ezekiel cried them. Dry bones, Ezekiel cried them. Dry bones, now hear the word of the Lord. Ezekiel connected them. Dry bones, Ezekiel connected them. Dry bones, Ezekiel connected them. Dry bones, now hear the word of the Lord. When your toe bone connected to you, foot bone, your foot bone connected to you, heel bone, your heel bone connected to you, ankle bone, your ankle bone connected to you, leg bone, your leg bone connected to you, knee bone, your knee bone connected to you, thigh bone, your thigh bone connected to you, hip bone, your hip bone connected to you, backbone, your backbone connected to you, shoulder bone, your shoulder bone connected to you, neck bone, your neck bone connected to you, head bone, now hear the word of the Lord. For them bones gonna walk around, them bones gonna walk around, them bones gonna walk around, now hear the word of the Lord.
Now, if I thought this week that some of our great artistic masters had butchered this story, I'm going to say it's nothing compared to what has happened to the song in the United States. This has had all references of Ezekiel and God removed from it, and it's now become a Halloween song. This is what children sing at Halloween, and they bring out dancing skeletons. How strange is that? Well, that's what I looked at. Bruce is like, no, they don't. This is all, when I was searching for it online, that's all I could find. And when I was reading about it, this is what they're like. This is a popular Halloween song. It's like, oh. Anyway, this is the story of oppression being overturned. And this is the hope and the expectation for Jewish people, as it has been. And it has been the hope and the inspiration for other oppressed people groups through and down through the years. Here's the story. God can bring hope and life in the darkest situations. But Jesus flips it again. Yes, the Jews want their own homeland, but there is something more that he wants to do. And this is where we get a picture of Jesus being fully divine. Here is Jesus as God. Because in the story where John records this conversation with Martha, he points out it's more than just Lazarus coming back to life. There's something far bigger that I want to do here. And he invites her. Do you want eternal life? Do you believe in me? Because I am going to turn everything you know about the universe upside down. If there is one thing we do know about life, it's that everything eventually dies. And if there's one thing in our culture that people like to avoid, it's thinking about death. Now, this is also why I think funerals can go horribly wrong, because suddenly you've got a group of people who refuse to think about death, having to think about death. If you ever want to see bad behaviour, come to a funeral of people who don't want to think about death. People act in really bizarre ways. So here we are, this human longing to somehow overcome death, to overcome the grief of losing a loved one, to overcome the fear of what happens when we die. And Jesus invites Martha to consider, I have the power, he says, over life and death. In me there is resurrection. Now Martha doesn't know what's coming. Martha doesn't know what Holy Week is going to bring. She doesn't know how it's going to end, but she has this faith. If you say it, I'll believe it because I believe in you. I've seen enough. But we have this ability to look and see what is coming. Jesus is going to come back to life, and in doing so is going to throw everything we know and understand about how the world works upside down. We know that people die, and yet Jesus comes back to life with this promise that anyone who believes in me will eventually have eternal life. And there's something else going on here. And I think the Pharisees, those religious teachers, they got it. Jesus wanted to turn upside down all the structures, all the ways that people are oppressed of this world, finally upside down, but not by gathering an army together and going to war, by radically transforming millions of people's lives with this knowledge that we are loved by the Creator of the universe, that God sees us and God holds out hope in the darkest situations. And so Jesus has challenged, has questioned these religious people that hold people in oppression. And where they think they're offering hope in the right way to God, he's like, you have no idea. I'm going to throw it upside down. And instead he offers this image of a future that is completely different from anything we understand, where power structures are turned upside down, where oppression ceases, and there's an invitation. It doesn't matter if you're Jewish or Roman or Greek or male or female or whatever. It doesn't matter. There's an invitation into a completely new way of life. And I think this is the thing we struggle with most. Because generally, we're kind of like, there's this nice story about Jesus, and he heals sick people, and he comes back from the dead, and I'm going to live my life and do my thing, and that's kind of going to be over there. What would happen if we took seriously this idea that the whole of the universe has been flipped upside down? What would it mean in our own lives if we took seriously Jesus wants to flip our own lives upside down and reorient ourselves to his way of thinking, where he healed the sick, where he welcomed the outcast, where he spoke truth to oppressive structures, and he invites us to come and join him and be part of this revolution that is happening in the world. And what would happen if we could see that the world and the universe has completely changed? I want to pray, but mainly just leave a time for God to talk rather than me. Because what would God say to you if we really believed that God wants to totally turn our lives upside down? What would that mean for you? And what would be the first step for you to learn to trust Jesus who conquers death? So let's pray and then just have a moment to hear what God might say to us. Jesus, you are the perfect human. You lived in a way that is so different from how we live our lives. The way you loved, the way you cared, who you spent your time with, what you spent your time doing. It is so foreign in our world. And you invite us to come and join you, to be part of a revolution in our world. So I pray, come and speak to us. Challenge us. You know each of us individually. Challenge us into what that might mean in our world.